Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the webinar. It's May 12th, 2015. Tonight I'm going to talk about wilderness therapy, but I'm also going to talk about what distinguishes Evoke's version of wilderness therapy from other models and other programs out there. So, for those of you that are new, it's an introduction to the ideas of wilderness therapy. For those of you who have been around for a while, even through our earlier days of Second Nature, what you're going to do is recognize some of the new aspects of the Evoke model as we've evolved over the years. So, let's get right into it. Let's talk about this multi-systemic or ecosystemic process that we call wilderness therapy. So part of what we're trying to do is interrupt old patterns, right? There's some value in systems theory to just interrupting old patterns because individuals in that system tend to make use of and access resources to be able to improve upon the situation after something is disrupted. So just pulling somebody out of the system, just changing the scenery, just shifting it just a little bit can have a positive effect on a system. Part of what wellness therapy does is it turns up the volume on everything that goes on. It turns up the volume for the client and the student, right? Everything gets amplified out there. Everything is under a microscope. But I think it also does it with the parents and the family members back at home. As those of you who have been in this for a while will recognize, the letters, the intentionality, the principles that you're practicing, that you're hearing about from your wilderness therapy, become much more clear, much more repetitive, much more loud, easier to understand and accept because you hear them at this higher volume. So we're amplifying and creating intensity for sure. Enactment refers to, it's a therapeutic term that refers to creating a new interaction that looks like or replicates an old interaction. So that's why you experience this microcosm in wilderness therapy. In other words, your peers and the staff tend to interact with you in ways that remind you of the system back at home. So we recreate the systems back at home. We do that naturally. Natural and logical consequences are an important part of wilderness therapy. So much of what happens out there, or the powerful stuff that happens out there, isn't the stuff that we create. Yes, we come in with our therapeutic models and our expertise, but so much of what happens out there is natural. One of the most important principles in parenting is practicing natural consequences and logical consequences. Natural are just allowing the consequences that naturally occur, not getting in the way, not providing a softer place for the child to land. And logical consequences is the practice of creating a consequence that's related to the behavior. So instead of everything being you're grounded, you might try consequences that are related to the specific kind of behavior. They're not contrived. Wilderness living, outdoor living is inherently challenging and requires a participant to become intentional, to become mindful of what's going on around them, from the weather to the adverse conditions to the work that it takes for all of the members of the group to work and to support each other so that the group runs effectively. All those things happen naturally, and our job is just to get out of the way and to highlight them and to point them out when they occur. An important part of what the research shows us about the effectiveness of wilderness therapy is that it changes the locus of control from external, that is, what happens to me in my life, the circumstances in my life determine or affect my happiness or my success, to internal, what happens from what I choose, how I choose to deal with things, the decisions that I make, the choices that I make, that's what determines my happiness and my success. So moving from external locus of control, to internal locus of control is one of the things that's very powerful in wilderness therapy, and also what our research tells us occurs for participants throughout the course of their program. There's something about the leverage and the captivity of it, right? They're not walls, so it's not a conscious barrier, but the barrier is you have to deal with the here and now, right? You can't escape. You can't easily walk away from the program. And so there is this piece that is about leverage and about being in a contained environment that is incredibly powerful, that requires participants to work their way through it because there's really nowhere to run. And even those who attempt to run, to walk away or run, still experience the futility of old escape routes. I even think this distance that gets created for the parents is a part of what increases the value of this process for them. So that captivity without walls is important. let's talk about what makes wilderness special compared to a little bit more in depth compared to other residential forms of treatment or inpatient treatments. We use the metaphor, right? We use Native American metaphor a lot. We use other kinds of metaphors, initiative, games, the metaphor of living in the wilderness as it relates to living at home. I always find it a little bit strange that we talk about wilderness therapy, primitive living, being a metaphor for living in the contrived world, the virtual world that we often find ourselves living in. So it's real, it's here and now. And we use those metaphors to say, how is this like home? How is the frustration and the communication problems that you experience at dinner like home? And sometimes you don't need to make those connections so overt right away, at least. You want them to run their course so that they add value to the participants' awareness and experience before you unpack them, before you anchor them in something historical or anchor them in something that relates to back home. Positive peer milieu. It is an open enrollment program, meaning that students are coming and going as they graduate and enter the program, but it is also a very small, contained group, relatively speaking. So that positive peer milieu is very valuable. The more senior members of the group are assigned early in the process to become mentors and teachers to the new members of the group. No matter how poorly you're struggling throughout the program, you still know something after you've been here 6 or 7 weeks more than the student or the client who just arrived. So there's opportunities, and both sides benefit when we engage the positive peer milieu. And a lot of times they do a lot of the work for us, right? They confront and teach and challenge each other because they've been through it. And these new skills and this new awareness that they have, they want to share it with others. And what do we do when we teach? We learn. We learn much more by teaching something than we do almost any other way. It's a self-esteem boost because you're dealing with something challenging. You're experiencing self-efficacy, which is that what I do makes a difference. You're engaging a lot of your resources, things that you could take for granted, take work. So from that, you have this experience of, I am resilient. I'm not fragile. So many of our participants come in, and in one version or in another, they tell us, I can't do this. I don't want to do this. I can't do this. It doesn't matter the age, young adult, adolescent. And what they experience after a few weeks is that it becomes relatively easy for them to meet some of the small challenges. And then we point that out. We say, remember how it was your first few weeks compared to your last few weeks? That ability to overcome and to adapt and to adjust, that's the same skill set, really, the same quality that you can apply to many areas in your life. So learning a sense of self-worth. And I think parents who make the decision, probably the biggest challenge to Evoke's model and wilderness therapy's model is that people want to send their children to something that is comfortable, to something that has more creature comforts. And while that might alleviate parental guilt in the immediate, it doesn't necessarily send the message that you wanted. The first thing I say that I learned about wilderness students, wilderness clients, when I started wilderness therapy, is they are much stronger than they or their parents believed that they were. So going through this difficult process, even for the ones who struggle all the way through, becomes a huge contribution to self-esteem. Identity is another piece, right? They learn a sense of who they are. Being away from peers back home, being away from family and even parents back home, there's this new focus on me, on my center. And because you're communicating in a sort of delayed way through letters, it requires you or asks you to focus more on yourself than on the reaction that you get from others. You stop having between each other this ping pong back and forth reactive type of relationship. And you start reacting from what is my truth, what is my center. Because something that's not reinforced or reacted to for 2 or 3 or 4 days, by the time they get the letter and letters come back, it's less likely to be an important contribution to behavior. So identity becomes an important part of it. That separateness, that distance, becomes this metaphor for developing your own sense of self. And I think parents actually improve their identity, their clarity about themselves, about where they're at as they go through the process also. I've talked about this idea of group microcosm. That's why parents will say to us after 1 week, gosh, you really get my child. Because your child we wouldn't even have to, in most cases, read the impact letter to see your child after a couple of weeks. They come and show up, and their stuff shows up. their strengths, their weaknesses, their tendencies, their patterns show up in these small groups. Obviously, having the removal of creature comforts and distractions and defenses, even things that can be positive, like it's extended family or reading a book, even those things that are positive at times, music, removing those things really heightens the experience, really creates a certain kind of rawness for the client, exposes them emotionally to themselves and to others. So removing them from distractions and defenses, cutting off their escape routes, as I described earlier, is an important part of the change. You can't manipulate wilderness. You don't have to do a lot of teaching when somebody doesn't build a good shelter, or when somebody doesn't pack their pack well, or when somebody doesn't follow staff directions with food preparation. You don't have to teach a lot. It just becomes inherent in the process. There's this rite of passage, right? So many of our rites of passage have been watered down in our culture. And so we use different phases, we use different levels, we use different symbolic ceremonies to heighten this idea of I'm moving through something, I'm changing, I am initiating. Old Native American tribes used to send young boys out on a vision quest or on a solo, and they would come back as a rite of passage as a new young man, and then contributed to the village. So there's something about going out into the woods, going out into the wilderness that is in itself, as a whole, a rite of passage. A sterile assessment environment, it's not necessarily sterile, biologically speaking, but it's sterile in the sense that we've removed a lot of the noise, right? We have an ability, because of our staff to student ratios, because of the small group living, to really see and look at the child. So along with objective testing information that can be ordered during this process, there's also an ability to see the student in this environment, this small environment where we can get a focus that you can't get in other places in so many ways. Removal of negative influences, and groups cycle, right? There are times when groups are more positive or negative, but even when there are negative influences, the level of supervision is so heightened that we can really dissect it and see what's going on in the child and in their life. And ideally, we want students and clients to go through cycles in our program where they're experiencing negative and positive influences to see how they respond to it. And we have such a comprehensive and supportive level of supervision that we can intervene in real time. It's like when you take your car to the shop and it stops making that sound, or your computer to the shop and it stops creating that problem. You want to be able to deal with challenges like peer pressure in real time. I've discussed a little bit about being vulnerable and outside of their comfort zone. It's a culture shock. And even though almost every student and client is immediately stricken by how different this is, even if they have some comfort with the outdoors, that culture shock, like the disruption that I was talking about during the last slide, can be an effective reset for them. A time for them to look at themselves, to have mirrored back to them how they're responding to it, and to start to decide intentionally the things that they're going to do in their life going forward to be healthy, to be unhealthy, and so forth. They learn to develop an interdependence. That goes on with students and staff, students and peers, and students and therapists. See, we feed them. But we feed them, the staff bring out food, they bring out supplies, the therapists bring out food and supplies and letters. They have to rely on each other. If they just work themselves, it takes too many people to get a meal taken care of, or camp cleaned up, or a large shelter put up. So there's a lot that goes on out there all day long, every day, that helps them develop healthy interdependence. I've given this example before, where you can walk away from a wilderness student if they're not engaging in therapy or don't want to talk or playing games with you, and 3 out of 4 times they're going to ask you to come back, or that next week they'll be much more engaged, because they want help. They want help to get through this program. They want to get back to the creature comforts. And so the wilderness and the leverage that you have heightens their motivation, if you will. And the futility of old coping mechanisms. People have to experience the futility of the old ways of coping for them to want to change. And so some students will make a remarkable change in the first week or two. We're suspicious of that. Always. Many students, it takes them a while, and parents can be frustrated and dismayed by that at times. And part of what we say is we want to see them trying the old ways of coping. We want to see the power struggles or the resistance because we want to treat it. And that can tell you as much about a client as anything. Because if you follow that symptom, right, follow that unhealthy coping mechanism, what you're going to find is a wound. You're going to find a pattern first, and beneath that pattern, you're going to find a wound or an injury or a hurt or an insecurity, and that's where the real healing is. So it's important for them to practice the old ways of doing it, and some practice it for quite a while before they're willing to change. The goals of wilderness therapy, it's a wake-up call. In a more sophisticated way, it's getting their attention and creating a new bottom. Parents say, don't they have to be at bottom? In the substance abuse community, that's a phrase that's commonly used. Some people would tell you that bottom is when you stop digging. And a new bottom can be any level, right? For some people, it is being destitute. For others, it's getting one DUI or showing up at work late or a spouse saying, I've had enough. Or in this case, being sent to a program or asked, in the case of a young adult, to go to the program. That can be a wake-up call. It buys you some time. That's why wilderness therapy is a wonderful catch-all for so many clients. Not only do we have individualized groups that have various populations and approaches so that we can really adapt to many different kinds of issues and presentations and diagnoses, but it's such a safe, emotionally speaking, container that it buys the family some time before they have to make long-term decisions. So why wilderness therapy? If you know you're going to go to a therapeutic school afterwards, one of those reasons is to interrupt a crisis and buy yourself some time to find out what the next best setting is. Obviously, there's a therapeutic benefit, and more so than in residential. Now, maintaining that is still tied to good aftercare planning, but the kind of dynamic change that goes on in wilderness therapy, those of you who are alumni would attest to this. It's never more dynamic than it is in wilderness therapy. We get that evaluative feedback, that assessment piece that happens through natural observations. We give it to family, to consultants, to home professionals, to aftercare program, so that we can say, here's what worked, here's what didn't work. We begin to establish and really initiate family work at Evoke. And like I said, there's a special kind of leverage or investment that happens when you place your child in a wilderness therapy program. There's a certain kind of powerlessness, right? Most of the time the placement is made sight unseen. It's foreign to you. The communication primarily is through letters to begin with, and on the weekly phone calls with your child's therapist, maybe a parent coordinator, maybe a mentor, these webinars, but it still is at a different pace than you were used to at home. And so that creates, again, a kind of intensity, a kind of focus that improves your clarity. We begin to start family work, and that's part of what we see our goal being while you're here, while your child is here. And we get preparation for the next step, right? We move from resignation to acceptance to investment. Parents ask the question often, will my child forgive me? My answer is simple. They will forgive you when they grow up and get healthy, because that's what healthy people do. Because forgiveness is something that is healing to the person who experiences the forgiveness, not to the person that they're forgiving. So they move through this process, and this is important, folks, and this is why wilderness therapy like ours is so important, is that you have to close the door, have to let go often before they're able to move on. Because if there's still a crack in the door, if they still think they can leverage you, if they still think you need to be forgiven, then that's likely to contribute to that resentment, that struggle, that stuckness staying there for some time. So letting go, closing the door, walking on, not negotiating, all those things lead to them focusing on the only thing that they can really change, which is themselves. The preparation for the next step leads to the softening effect. So while if everybody didn't go to wellness therapy and just went to a therapeutic school or program or residential treatment center, if that were the case, the level of care that might be required in most cases would be higher. So we soften the rough edges, right? We fight some of the initial battles. The battle of being in therapy. They throw tantrums, they threaten, they walk away, they write you angry letters, they write you sad and apologetic letters. all of those things. They shut down all of those things. And because wilderness therapy is so flexible, it allows us to say, do what you're going to do. We'll be here when you're done. And again, they experience the futility of that and eventually accept it. You know, they resolve themselves to it, then they accept it. And then as they do that, most of them will get to a place of investment and insight and even excitement about the process. That's why over the years, over the 20 years or so that I've been doing it, about 25% of the staff who work in these programs are former students because of that investment, that excitement about it. Changing levels of long-term care or aftercare, that's like the softening effect, right? It changes the level of care that they can thrive in initially instead of having to fight those battles. We talk about the high ceiling and the low floor. Wilderness has a really low floor. We can tolerate a lot of behavior. And so what that means is that we can get them to a place where they can move to where there's a higher floor and a higher ceiling, more freedom, more opportunities, more choices, because they've moved through some of the initial resistance, some of the initial battles with us. Socialization skills are an incredible, especially for those with nonverbal learning disabilities, right? Small groups. Remember this, folks. This is important. I'm going to get to this later. Staff are on 8-day shifts. 8-day shifts. There aren't many jobs and hardly any in therapeutic programming except for wilderness that have a staff member being on shift for 8 days in a row. That's powerful. You can't slip through the cracks. You can't simply hold your breath until the next staff member comes along. It's much more difficult to play a staff member against another. It's much more difficult to hide. So we have all of that, and it requires them to work through difficulties instead of to avoid them or to work their way around them. Like I said, the assessment, both objective testing and natural observation, while in a stable, substance-free environment, is very powerful. Let's talk about the Evoke founding principles that really are what distinguish us from other wilderness and experiential programs. We believe in providing the best possible treatment for each client's whole health with comprehensive family support. There is no other program that I know of that provides and commits to this many resources as Evoke Therapy does, from parent mentors, parent coordinator, therapist, of course, webinars twice a week live, 230 plus webinars archived, a robust interactive parent portal with a number of reading and assignment resources, attendance required, 6 of them required a 12-step meeting, parent workshops every month or 5 weeks. Another part of our program, of course, is the parent intensives. A lifetime ability to log in and watch these webinars. And I know I'm missing something, but all of that is fairly comprehensive. And we believe that is part of what contributes to lasting health, lasting change, generalizable results. And we believe in whole health. We believe in the mind, body, and spirit. We believe in physical health. We believe in a better diet. We believe in exercise. Right? We believe in taking care of yourself physically. We believe in pursuing a spiritual course in your life. So asking yourself about a higher power, looking at the religion that you were raised in, asking yourself, where am I? Why am I here? What's my purpose? How do I fit in? Wilderness lends itself to that so well. Many people, the research shows us, attribute their change to being out in nature and the beauty that inspires them to see their place in the universe in a more spiritual context. And then, of course, we have an academic program. We're accredited at every level. So that's an important part of our program. Continually being a transformative program and company. So part for us means we believe at Evoke in whole health for everybody, including our employees. We support our leadership in getting therapy and going to their own intensives. We believe, I talk about all the time, doing my own work. We encourage that of all of our therapists and our staff. So it's hard to take somebody to a place that you've never been. It's hard to be as effective sitting on the couch of the therapist, so to speak, when you haven't sat on the couch of the client. So much of what I've learned, what I bring to the table, is from my own work. Yes, I have theory. Yes, I have education. Yes, I have experience, but most of the valuable stuff that I bring to the table comes from my own work. We have a conference once a year where we practice that. Like I said, it's built into our budget to support our staff to do that. So we believe in that. That's part of our ethic in this process. And we believe in always striving to evolve, always asking ourselves new ideas. What are we going to do differently? What can we add to this process? And then, of course, we believe in the ability of the outdoors and all of our programming, from our wilderness therapy programming, which most of you are in, to our parent, family, and individual intensives for adults, to our summer programs, our canyoneering, pursuits, climbing programs, all of those. We believe in the power of the outdoors as an inherent part of our program. Let's talk about Abraham Maslow, very famous sociology mind in this process. He would talk about this idea that unless we could take care of our basic needs, physical needs, food, water, and shelter, safety, it would be hard for us to focus on, to acquire, to move through the more abstract needs and stages of our life. It'd be hard to work on belonging and acceptance or self-esteem or even self-actualization. Right? How could you work on self-actualization and belonging if you were fighting to survive, to feed yourself? That's Maslow's idea. It's very Americanized, right? Most of us think that way. Right? Take care of the basic needs first, because if you're dealing with the stress of the other things, you can't really learn and grow. Wilderness therapy flips that upside down and says, and we know this from anthropological studies, that it's in the context often of struggling to survive that we acquire and learn and pass on all of these lessons. And so what it means to belong in a group comes from working together to cook and clean and take care of yourself. And sometimes in the moment you don't know this when you're going through the stress. But it is those great stressors in our life that teach us so much about our character, teach us so much about who we are, teach us what we can achieve, teach us who we are. Primitive cultures, they weave together their religion and their legends, their stories with day-to-day living. They're not separated out. And for Americans, often our culture, we seem to have separated them all out, so that we don't see, they aren't woven together. We don't see the struggle as part of the lesson. We don't embrace it. We look to avoid the struggle, to anesthetize ourselves, to numb ourselves, to go around it instead of seeing the value in it. So the belief in wilderness therapy, the idea in wilderness therapy, the model in wilderness therapy is that through these experiences that we pass on these values. A great quote from Will White when studying the history of wilderness therapy, quoting one of the founders of wilderness therapy, he said, "Whenever we adopted what we have come to call contrived experiences, the overall impact diminished for the participants." So the more contrived it is, the more made up, the more constructed by you, the more likely children are to feel alienated from it and to push it away and say it's about you. It's not about life. This is your model. But the more natural the experience can be, specifically in wilderness therapy, the more likely the principles are to be internalized. Here's a typical day. I've showed this slide before, right? This is what it looks like during the day. We have mindfulness activities. There are meals, of course. There's hiking almost every day, ideally 5 days a week. They have personal time to work on assignments from the therapist, reading and writing, letter writing, and so forth. They have chores throughout the day, being able to set up camp, dinner preparation. Mealtime is a big deal. Group therapy, of course, they go to sleep. Now, on the right, these are things that happen throughout the day as needed. Standing groups are groups that can be initiated by anybody at any time. It might be average for 5 to 10 of these to happen a day, and these are 5 to 10 minute groups. Individual sessions, both with staff and with the therapist. Layovers are days that we don't hike. Laundry comes twice a week, so they have enough clean underwear, clean socks every day, and then they switch out their layers and those get washed. They take showers and clean themselves a couple of times a week. Food comes out for redistribution a couple of times a week, and fresh fruit and vegetables comes out every day or almost every day. They have personal time, like I mentioned. The emotional curriculum relates to the therapeutic skills, the emotional aspect of the program. And then, of course, there are hard skills like taking care of your shelter, being able to build a fire. And so there's a relationship between all of those. And then in addition to those, to the soft skills and the hard skills, there's the therapy assignments. I said emotional curriculum is the therapeutic stuff, but that's divided into hard skills, soft skills, which are the communication, the therapeutic ideas, and then there's therapy assignments that the therapist gives. There's academic curriculum that we ask them to do and is a part of moving from phase to phase. Letters to and from home are part of the week all week. Solos are that we have a whole webinar on solos where it's about 48 to 72 hours where they're set up by themselves and they don't talk to anybody else. The staff come along and check on them several times a day, but they spend some time just reflecting, just being by themselves and seeing how they like that company. Chores, of course. Mindfulness and meditation is a part of Evoke's curriculum, a part of all the groups. Mindful eating, learning to meditate, learning to have a talking meditation, learning to focus and to feel what your body is feeling is a part of it. We practice and encourage service as a part of it. Oasis, or the sojourn for our young adults, is a place that they can go, learn to cook, get some showers, maybe watch a video. They can do that during the process. That can happen with our young adults. And then most importantly, everything becomes grist for the therapeutic meal. Meaning that good is good and bad is good. And struggles are good and successes are good. Everything becomes something, right? That the therapist and the staff incorporate into the therapeutic lesson. Doesn't matter what it is. I have some pictures here. This is a student making a Bojo fire. So we're using experiential metaphor to teach them patience, delay of gratification, frustration tolerance. Many parents will remark that when their child is working on a Bojo fire, that they're more impressed with the child who spends 20 minutes or an hour working on it but can't get a fire than they are with the child that does it easily. It is a cultural immersion, right? Not only do we borrow from other cultures like Native American, but being in the field, they have their own language, they have their own culture, right? They are removed from electronics. It's a kind of a detox from all the electronic things that we experience all the time. So it's the language about feelings, the rules and protocols of the group all become a new culture for them. And the wonderful thing about switching cultures is that you can see the same lessons, the same core ideas and lessons in a new culture, but they don't look like, smell like, and sound like your parents. And so you're more likely to accept them, less likely to automatically bring up that wall to create that sense of individuation and identity. Here's a backpack that's lying on the ground. I don't know if it's the most well-made backpack, but it gives you an idea. The backpack and carrying it becomes a part of the burdens that you carry in your life. I've told the story about my first wilderness student ever and how, as we were walking, I heard him complaining about home and the pain and the trauma that he experienced at home. And then he would shift to talking about the pain of his backpack because he spent no time packing it, just rushed it together and was leaning to one side. And after 20 minutes, I couldn't tell when he was talking if he was talking about the pain at home or the pain of his backpack. So you see how these metaphors evoke, right? Bring out emotion, bring it to the surface, and how then it can be treated. I've already discussed this distance. So many parents say, why the lack of contact, at least initially? Why can't they talk to more of their family members or their siblings? Because the symbol, the event, the process of being separated from family and that far out in the middle of nowhere really does replicate and create an experience of who am I, right? Because like I said, you're not having that knee-jerk back and forth with people at home. And so you tend to focus on what you can control more. You tend to focus on yourself. You tend to focus on finding your center, your honesty, your truth, and speaking from it instead of what lie, what exaggeration, what can I sell somebody? When there's nobody to sell, nobody to impress, nobody to fight with, you're just left with yourself. So that distance creates a structure that improves differentiation, which is a sense of separateness, which can lead to connection. Separateness is the first ingredient in connection. The more we have a separate individual self, the more of a capacity that we develop to connect to other people. Letter writing therapy, I've seen nothing more powerful than letter writing therapy in terms of family therapy. It's there. It's on paper, right? You can see it. You can talk about it with your wilderness therapist. You can talk about it with your home therapist. We can talk about it with each other. We can coach you. Same with your child. Because it's there, because it's not just moving through time quickly, right? As we are when we are speaking, we can really focus on and create intention around it. I have a picture of some staff members here because I think they're probably the most underappreciated, unreported, important aspect of our program. I already told you about the 8-day shifts, but they're incredible people. I mean, imagine the kind of people that go out there to deal with a group of, 8 to 10 students for 8 days in a row without a break. They can have breaks. They're actually required to have breaks during the day, but without leaving. And what kind of a character would that take? And how resilient are they? And they don't look like you, and they don't sound like you. They don't. I joke they don't smell like you. And because of that, they're not threatening. Because of that, your children don't feel smothered. Because of that, your children don't need to push them away to maintain that sense of identity that I was just speaking of. But because of that, because they're slightly counterculture, they can teach the same principles that you're trying to impart to them, and they're more likely to be accepted, or at least considered. And they're incredibly nurturing and patient, and they're very clinically sophisticated. And so much of what goes on, folks, is between the therapist's visits. Yes, we're out there 2 days a week, and we kind of set the agenda for the week. We create the treatment plan. But it's the staff and it's the stuff that happens in between where the real work occurs for most of our students. So let's talk about the take-home. Wilderness is a delivery method. It's the backdrop. But we're really using traditional models in therapy. So when you think about wilderness therapy, it's outdoor, primitive living, but we're using attachment theory. We use at Evoke specifically, we're influenced by Joseph Campbell a lot and the hero's journey. We use developmental psychological approaches and models, family systems models, cognitive behavioral models, 12-step dialectical behavioral play therapy, and many others. I can't list them all. And each therapist has their own niche, right? Their own perspective, their specialty. And because of that, we cannot be all things to all people, but close. We can provide an incredibly powerful therapeutic intervention in nature, in the outdoors. And that's just the backdrop that enhances everything and does a lot of the work for us. And then we're using all the same therapies, the therapists in outpatient and residential treatment, therapeutic boarding, treatment centers, all of them are using those. We just have this wonderful partner called nature that adds to the dynamic. Not only is wilderness therapy evidence-based, and the accumulation of evidence is building over the years, but Evoke therapy specifically has contributed more to the evidence in wilderness therapy, in the field of wilderness therapy, than any other wilderness therapy program, and it's not close. There are others who have contributed some, but we contribute to the National Association of Schools and Programs and to the OBH, Outdoor Behavioral Health Cooperative. And we have contributed our data to them more than almost all of the wilderness programs combined, almost more than half of it. And so we're committed. We believe in it. We have ongoing. You can go to our website and go to the research tabs and learn about what we're doing. You can look at the outcomes. And we're going to continue. As soon as we finish this follow-up study that we're engaged in right now, we'll start over again and we'll keep doing. We believe that when something is observed, that it is improved. And we believe that we have an obligation to treatment professionals and parents to continue to do that research. And not a lot of people just will lean on others, but we believe in doing it ourselves. I talked about family support and education. I forgot to mention parent support groups that we try to do in some of the major cities, along with the ones that you come to us for. So we have a robust, unparalleled level of family support and education. And then, of course, whole health. We want to look, parents will ask me, what if they're not keeping clean? What if they're not eating well? What if they're not sleeping well? What if they're not practicing good hygiene? What if they're not doing their schoolwork? And my response is always, then it's part of the treatment plan. It wasn't like all of our students who came were absolutely crazy. They just weren't functioning in various areas of their life, and for some of them in many areas of their life. So it could have been school. So why take away school? Why do wellness therapy programs not have academics? Why would you do that? That's the #1 most common complaint on our applications. Why would you not have parents come out during the program or get on phone calls with their children if family relationships were an important part of the challenge, right? Give them some time alone, get a foundation, But have parents come out at the beginning and at the end. Have phone calls during the program. And I know in most cases I'm preaching to the choir here because you're with us at Evoke. But those are important aspects that we don't want to remove and then pat ourselves in the back and say, look how successful we're being. When we remove various aspects of their lives that were the challenges that they were experiencing. So we believe in whole health and looking at the whole person, both for our clients and for our employees. So that's the Evoke therapy model. That's the wilderness therapy model with the Evoke emphasis added into it. And I'm happy to take any live questions, Stephanie, if any have come in during the webinar. How do you counsel students, parents regarding student transition back to the plugged-in, fast-paced, peer pressure, super stimulating world after being in wilderness? Well, it's, you start thinking about that the minute that a child enrolls in the program. But you start talking about building resiliency, and it's not like they move on this upward trajectory and don't have dips. So they'll dip. And so you try to make comparisons to it. That's why we have phone calls. That's why we have visits. And then you try to create an aftercare plan that graduates them down to the real world. So we don't take them from the wilderness and throw them out back to their high school with no home support therapy, aftercare planning. So aftercare planning is a part of it. Graduating them slowly, having the parents have an aftercare plan that graduates them slowly back to full autonomy and full freedom. And then constantly finding ways to introduce them to some things, but also to relate, metaphorically speaking, what goes on out there to what was going on at home. And it's a challenge, right? It's a challenge to go back to all of those things. So you've got to build up some resilience, right? You've got to develop some internal locus of control. You've got to develop some identities, some esteem. And then you're going to gradually put them back into that environment. And you're going to have safety and safety nets and support as you move through the various stages back to full autonomy again. It's an important part of the process, though. That aftercare planning. That's why so many of them will talk about it being the best time in their life. Even, folks, I can't tell you how many times, even those who resist it, even those who struggle, will write us back or call us back and say, it's the safest and freest I ever felt in my life. It's the most success. Many parents, even some of you on this webinar, I'm sure tonight could say that it's the most success that you and your family ever experienced. So I'll take that next question in just a moment, Stephanie. Let me go through all these and then I'll take whatever questions are at the end. So we have the intensives coming up and the parent workshops are different than intensives. So it should say intensives and workshop. So on the 20th and the 21st, I told you that was coming. We would like all families to go to that. That's a weekend hosted by Paul Goddard, 2 days in St. George. And then I'm running, that should say the 31st. Sorry about the typos. The 28th to the 31st is a parent intensive. 3.5 days. We're taking parents out there to do a lot of their own work. We're about half full right now, so we still have some spaces. You can coordinate that with a parent visit. These are for parents who want to do more of their own personal work. When I talk about doing work and looking at yourself, that's this. You'll get some of that at the workshop, but a lot of it's psychoeducation, some exposure to the experience. But intensives is like you going out for your own wilderness therapy program. Now, we do it out of the Oasis, so you'll have some of the creature comforts. But we're going to do mindfulness, psychodrama, group therapy, parent education, skill building, role plays, and so forth. And a lot of it's going to be deeper work. So this one coming in, we're trying to do them once a month. This parent intensive that I'll be hosting will start on May 28th and will end on the 31st. Paul Goddard, if you can come to that one, for sure on the 20th or the 21st also. Here are the parent support groups in the various cities. Marin County, Philadelphia, Boston, New York. Please RSVP. Please come if you do RSVP. We've been having lately a pattern of people RSVPing and not showing up, which makes it challenging for us for sure. So, and there's the locations, the dates, and also the emails. Notice that the 3 on the East Coast, you RSVP to Stephanie, and the one on the West Coast, you RSVP to Jennifer at 49jennifer@live.com. We want every family to go to 6 of these while their child is there. That's what the programs ask, so that you get a sense of them. And I haven't listed this before, but this is one of our new programs that we launched with Evoke. It's an outdoor adventure trip. Um, where our first one will be not the 13th to the 16th. I'm full of typos today, aren't I, Stephanie? I think it's the 13th to the 26th. I think it's a 14-day trip. Will be our first summer adventure trip. We've done some custom ones and some for programs, but you can go to our website to find out more. And you can email us at intensives at evoketherapy.com or pursuits at evoketherapy.com. Social media, please follow us on social media for the to be able to follow us, to see announcements, to see stories and pictures. And our blog is, we've had great content since we started Evoke. It's one of the small little things that you see that's different about Evoke. We can't keep up with the amount of blogs that our staff are submitting because people are so excited about the new work and new direction. Then you can go to the Parent Alumni Foundation book page on Amazon, buy a book there, and you get part of your purchase, same prices on regular Amazon, goes towards families that can't afford treatment. So head on over there for that. And the next webinar will be next Tuesday, May 19th at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. It'll be open question and answer. Stephanie, I think you had a couple of questions that came in after I took them, and then we can wrap up. What is the role of wilderness, specifically Evoke, in relapse? What's your advice for when the aftercare plan, therapeutic school, or whatever it may be is concluded and there is relapse? How many times can one come back to the wilderness? Great question. I wasn't. People have different philosophies about this. In the cases where I had students return to Evoke after being with me before, in those cases to the wilderness, it was always effective. It was always powerful. It was always this wonderful reunion, and the work that we did was much, much deeper. But I want to be careful in considering whether that's the best option. So I think talking to your wilderness therapist, talking to whatever other professionals, I don't think it should be dismissed, and I don't think it should be the assumption. It's something that should be carefully considered. I had about 1,000 clients on my caseload as a wilderness therapist in the years that I've been doing it. I probably had returning students 10 or 15 times, somewhere in that range. I loved it every time. It was powerful every time. And so I think it's individually based. It's based on, well, revisiting that experience. It's not going to be the same lessons. It's not going to be the same experience. But it can be going back and saying, what I would usually say to my students is, it's great to see you. Not under these conditions, but it's great to see you. Tell me what you've learned. Tell me what's going on. And so it's that spirit, it's that experience of saying, what happened? Where'd you go wrong? And for them, it's as much of a mystery, or at least a challenge, as it is for anybody else in their life. So I think it ought to be considered and not automatically dismissed, and I think it ought not to be the go-to in every situation. But that's what part of our pursuits allows for. And our adult intensives that we're doing in October, that's what that can be for. That can be a 3 or 4 day re-immersion in the process for young adults. Or our pursuits can be a wonderful warm-up, a wonderful opportunity to re-engage, to re-experience, to remind what's going on. But sometimes they need more. Sometimes it's more than just a relapse, an incident, and it's a full relapse where they're back in the same kind of mindset. And in some cases, where it was effective before, that can be an effective. So my answer is case by case. Case by case. My son is a few months into therapeutic boarding school, and I've heard him say that he misses his therapist, and especially the field staff in the wilderness. I forgot to say something about field staff. Field staff, that's the number one thing that students, former students say made the difference for them. So they are the unsung heroes, like I said earlier. It's a very important part of the process. Also, I have to say that the transition camp is still the best time we've ever spent together. Tough, but the best. So for those of you who are new, what this parent is sharing with us, with me, with you, is incredibly common. Even in cases where they didn't like it, right? Where they weren't embracing it. This can still be the sentiment from everybody years later. So it's kind of like life. Just be mindful and appreciating what you have when you have it. Right now, if you're at Evoke, you have a very safe place, emotionally and physically, for your child to be. You have a very powerful support. You're going to have to adjust to, in many cases, the level of communication and customer support that Evoke provides compared to other schools and settings, because it's a much more intense level of support. So, and it is hard. It is hard work, but it works and it's valuable. Excuse me, got the hiccups. All right, folks. All right, thank you for joining us tonight. I hope these points of contact are helpful. I will talk to you next Tuesday evening at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. In the meantime, you can watch any webinars. Go to our parent portal. Enjoy the time that you have right now. Enjoy the letters coming and going. Enjoy what you're learning. Enjoy the lessons that are coming, even during the struggle, perhaps especially during the struggle. Have a great night. Take care. Bye bye.